Hello, marketers. This is the Funnel Lab. Welcome to Funnel Lab Fridays. I'm your co-host, Doug Bell. I run marketing here at CaliberMind. I am joined today by Drew Smith, CEO and founder of Attributa, and Tara Wildt, who is our Director of Marketing Analytics Services at CaliberMind. Got a great topic for you today. We're going to get in the weeds of attribution. Today, Tara and I and Drew are going to talk about really the basics of attribution models and how to apply them for your business needs. Drew and Tara, thank you for being here with me on a slightly warm, slightly cloudy, slightly cool, depending on where you are in the country, autumn morning. Your roles, without fancy titles, are really to make attribution work for some very complex organizations. So I can think of no two better people to join us today and help us out. Today, what we're going to do is talk about what the models are, how they work, and how they can be applied depending on your needs. And I express that in terms of business needs. Sometimes those needs change depending on how complex your funnel is. Drew, tell us a little bit about Attributa, and then I want you to tell us what wrench sets and attribution have in common.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on here. So Attributa, we're a consulting firm that really truly specializes in B2B marketing attribution, hence the name Attributa. So we work with a lot of customers that need help with marketing data, marketing analysis, multi-touch attribution, all of the above, and just help them be successful and meet the business needs that they have. And so, to answer your question about what wrenches and marketing attribution have in common, well, it's an analogy that I use regularly about attribution models. And where this analogy came from is one of the biggest challenges that I think organizations have as they're starting their attribution journey is a lot of them get caught up in this, well, which attribution model do we use? And they want to pick an attribution model that's the attribution model for their business or custom create one, and that's the attribution model. And that's where my analogy comes from, which is you don't go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy a set of wrenches, pick your favorite wrench, and throw out the rest of them. You use the different wrenches for the different use cases they're built for. And that's how attribution models are designed to be used. Attribution models are designed for different use cases. And so you don't pick an attribution model and throw out the rest of them and just use that attribution model. Because if you do, you might be over-indexing for something that is really because you're using the attribution model in an incorrect way. So to me, that's what wrenches and attribution models have in common.
Okay, I'm going to steal that, just so you know. We heard it here live. I'm stealing your analogy, but I think it's a really apt one. And I'm going to bring it back over to you, Tara. Thank you for being back on the show, by the way. Just give us a little smidgen on your role. And again, I sort of feel like you and Drew, in many ways, have similar roles with customers. So tell us about your role and how you help customers understand attribution models.
Yeah, so I work on our customer engagement team, which is really the part of our customer success team that focuses on enabling marketing teams and kind of helping them use our tool and understand which attribution models make sense for their business and in kind of what setting, and really kind of taking the powerful data and analytics that they have at their fingertips and translating that to things that can help them make marketing decisions and present to their stakeholders, things like that.
No small task, and Drew knows this as well. And we've had episodes on how hard that is and getting the data in the right place. We're sort of going, okay, that part is over. Right, we're in a place where application is key. And what I want to do today with the two of you is sort of walk through the different models. We're going to start with a model that I think everybody's pretty familiar with, sometimes because it's just simply in your Salesforce instance, right? Or you've done it before. You've pulled a spreadsheet down with a bunch of opportunities. You've been like, this is the first touch and therefore attribution. So Drew, I'm going to bring it back to you. Let's start with this idea of single touch. I think I just described it pretty well. You guys let me know if I've missed anything in terms of how it occurs. But talk to me about business application first, Drew. Where do first and last touch models, simple models, what role do they play for marketers and for businesses in general?
Yeah, I think that first touch models in particular are I when I'm working with a client and we come up with a use case for a first touch model, it is an extremely narrow use case. And it is truly to understand the tactics or the channels that are bringing people to us for the very first time. And we're trying to understand how our investment into those channels and tactics ultimately brings people in, but then that those people turn into pipeline and deals, right? And that's how you can optimize your extreme top of the funnel tactics and channels. Now, that's going to mean that channels like email are not included, because email is very rarely, if ever, a first touch, right? So there's certain channels and tactics that you would expect to not be included in that, but it's a very, very narrow use case. Now, when we talk about last touch, I always ask a question when somebody brings up the conversation of last touch. Last touch in relation to what? Because it could be last touch in relation to MQL, it could be last touch in relation to opportunity creation, it could be last touch prior to opportunity closure. So the first thing that we have to define is what is this last touch in relation to, right? And once we define that, then it becomes a really, really valuable model, because what you're measuring at that point in time is which channels and tactics are most prevalent and effective at a specific point in time in the funnel, right? If you're using last touch prior to MQL, this is how you measure your tactics and channels that are designed to create MQLs. And then you can see how they go on to become ops and wins. Same thing with last touch prior to opportunity creation. What's the thing that happens right before they turn into an opportunity? And then we see how those turn into deals, right? And then same thing with last touch before closed won. Is there anything that pops up right before an opportunity is closed won that we seem to see a lot of correlation around? And so that's a really useful model when you really just want to measure a point in the funnel or a point in time in the funnel. Because that's what last touch is designed to understand, is a specific point in time in the funnel.
So first touch, in many ways, is probably the simplest model we're going to talk about today. And in my experience, it is a really wonderful way of understanding exactly what you talked about, Drew, which is which of my channels and campaign tactics are successful at the top of the funnel. What's creating that initial engagement? And let's say even just 15 years ago, the buying cycles, even in the most B2B and complex buying cycles, you could see a through line from first touch to last touch fairly easily, right? Like you didn't have this sort of mishmash in the middle of channels sort of aiding people through that whole process of the point of purchase. Whereas as you start to get, and here immediately going up the complexity curve, if you pointed out, as you get to last touch, now it's like, okay, what's the most critical conversion point? And potentially you're in a spot where your last touch model, you might have several last touch models depending on what you think those critical points are. So does this square, Tara, with you in terms of your experience with clients, how they tend to see the world with first and last touch? And then how often are you seeing people using first and last touch in their implementations?
Yeah, definitely makes sense of what I've seen. I'd say actually using something like first touch, that's how a lot of our clients kind of come to us. They have a first touch model that they've been able to implement, maybe using like their CRM or other processes. And a lot of times it's the desire to then evaluate, what's happening in last touch or move into some of these kind of multi-touch things we're going to talk about in a bit. That's really the evolution of their attribution models and where they want to get to when they start talking to CaliberMind.
Okay, Tara, I'm going to stay with you. What is an even weighted attribution model?
So, I mean, it kind of is a little bit self-explanatory, but, you're giving kind of equal credit to the touch points that are happening. But the difference is that you're looking at the entirety of the buyer journey as opposed to, what happens at the top of the funnel or what happens right before an MQL or an op creation. You're also considering what's happening after that point. So marketing effectiveness is spread over the entirety of the buyer journey as opposed to at the very top or, before an op gets handed off to maybe a sales team.
And I have to say, I think even weighted is probably exactly, Tara, what's an even weighted model? It's in the title, dude. What do you think it is, right? So I think it is the easiest model to comprehend that sort of as you go up the complexity curve. But I also opinion zone here, folks. Again, this is me within the four walls of the different organizations I've worked for. It's probably the most deceptive model, especially if you have really complex buyer journeys with lots and lots and lots of touch points. You basically go, everything's the same. Everything's the same, right? So how often you see even weighted models applied, Drew? Are they typically something you see used, or do you feel like sort of an interim, it's an interim step for folks until they get to maybe more nuanced model applications?
Yeah, a lot of the ways that I see even weighted models, or sometimes referred to as linear models, used is as a baby step to surfacing this marketing attribution data outside of the marketing organization. You know, when you get into complex weighted models and you're presenting this to a sales organization or a finance department, a lot of times what happens is the conversation gets derailed by just talking about how things are weighted. Well, why is this got 30% and this one's got 10%? I don't want to have those conversations. So when we start getting marketing attribution data outside the marketing organization, and even weighted or linear models, a great way to start getting people used to multi-touch attribution without having to go down these rabbit holes of why did this get this percent and why did that get this percent. It kind of simplifies everything for everybody. But once everybody kind of gets used to that, it's usually a pretty quick step to a more complex weighted model that does a better job than an even weighted model.
Okay, shall we look at some examples here, folks? I think it's always, I'm pretty visual. It's always really helpful to be able to see stuff. So I'm going to pull up a demo data set here for a reasonably complex buyer journey, not terribly complex, but reasonably complex, let's say multi-channel, 4 or 5 channel. And I'm just going to pop this up. I'm going to start with a first touch model, and then I'm going to update the model for even weighted. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this into W shaped. And that's where I sort of want you guys commenting on this change. So let me just pop this up for us. And as we're doing this, folks, what I want to explain here, because I think it's really important, is that what I'm about ready to show you looks really simple. At the end of the day, it's a bar chart. If you got PowerPoint, you have Excel, you can do this, right? It is not necessarily the presentation layer that you want to be thinking about. It is that data collection and data scoring. Drew just very lightly sort of alluded to this here a moment ago. So this might look simple, but getting us here is fairly difficult. Data hygiene, scoring are really important aspects. So I'm going to first touch right now. And again, what I'm showing you is this data set for a reasonably complex buyer journey. And if I'm going to show you guys anything here, it's just sort of this color coding. So we're looking at 3/4 here. And what you can see is this is a first touch model. So you'll see that here in terms of the model we've deployed. And we're looking at a channel level. Again, really simple channel model. And what you're going to see here is from a first touch standpoint, I've got really 3 channels that are contributing a little bit from events. You're just going to see that the SEO channel from a first touch standpoint, the performance marketing channel, those are significant channels for us. But we're going to switch over here. And we're going to take a look at what we talked about a moment ago, which is last touch. And if people have good visual acuity, I have synesthesia. I see the craziest stuff in the world. Like, to me, this is a great pattern. But what you're seeing is when you go to last touch, to Drew's point, I don't know if you noticed this, folks, but this sales prospecting channel, it went from, let's go take a look real quick. Let's go back. Ready for the whiplash, everybody? Here we go. Okay, you don't even really see, look at this, how little impact sales prospecting has on the top of the funnel. But if we look at bottom of funnel, to Drew's point, sort of what's converting, folks, those sellers are really, really important, and probably not a shock to many of you to know that good sales methodology leads to pipeline, right? Am I doing a discovery call that leads to my understanding of the prospect's needs? Am I presenting a little bit of the product to them in a way that makes them go, yeah, I'm interested, move me along? Whoever has this sales organization, great job, because they're doing a good job at the bottom of the funnel. All right, so shall we make a leap to even weighted together here? Hold on a second real quick. Let's get there. And again, we're going to look at this contrast real quick. And you're going to see this is sort of this peanut butter spread across the channels. But you're going to see it's really not terrible. I mean, I look at this and go, I don't know what to take away from it. But you can see how quickly sort of things get smushed out. Okay. Drew, let's make this leap to W shape for me, would you? So as I go to W shape, tell me what I'm going to be looking at here in a moment. In other words, sort of what's the methodology and thinking behind W shape models?
Yeah, so I mean, the big difference between a W-shaped model and an even-weighted model is that the W-shaped model is going to put higher weighting on the top 3 points of the W model, right? So instead of, if I have 10 touch points, all contributing to an opportunity, using the even-weighted model, every touch point gets 10% of the value of the opportunity. Using a W-shaped model, you might have one touch point getting 30%, another touch point getting 2%, another touch point getting 5%. It's going to be vastly different, the weighting based on the different weighting in the model. So it can favor different channels or tactics based on different criteria. Like it could be based on where they are in the funnel, or where the touch point happened in the funnel, and so on.
So Tara, would I be right in thinking about a W-shaped model in the following way? And Drew, thank you. That was an excellent description because you could get in the weeds in that. That was great. Thank you. Is it appropriate to say, I think when I'm looking at my marketing and sales efforts, I think the 3 most critical points are the beginning, the middle, and the end. Is that a fair way to think about a W-shaped model?
It is. It typically also gives, more weight to a primary contact on an opportunity, which can be really important, especially if you get into larger like enterprise orgs that have a lot of people involved in a buying cycle. If you have good hygiene and you want to make sure that you're giving more weight to the contact who has been assigned to be kind of, your primary decision maker, that's really important for teams to also kind of understand with the W-shaped model, how their tactics are working with the person who's going to have the biggest sway.
Okay. I had a political science professor who would do this to me. They're right in the middle of a class. I love this guy's class. And he would stop and make us recap everything we just talked about, right? Okay, I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to be that guy right now. So we're going to go back and we sort of talked about what these different models are. I want to get into the business application. We talked a little bit about first touch and last touch in the context of an organization very much like a B2B SaaS org, right? Meaning, every one of these models we talked about, I can find utility for it, but let's go to business types now, right? And so I'm going to make a statement. You guys tell me if I have this fairly right, but if I am, say, a B2B organization and I have a fairly short, very quick sales cycle, that first and last touch model can work really well for me. True or false? True. So maybe I'm e-commerce as an example, although I would say e-commerce is way too complex for a B2B model. But the idea is that I see something, I show interest. This is not e-commerce, by the way. I maybe am willing to talk to a salesperson, and that is a 10-day cycle. That's really good first and last touch territory.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Let's move up the complexity curve. I have a lot of channels that I need to deploy. Let's say I have a fair amount of paid social media. I do email nurturing. I do retargeting, right? And as you saw before, I'm an organization where the seller quality is really important. What model should I think about using at that point? Or is the answer not that simple? What should I be thinking about then?
I would personally say the answer is not quite that simple, because I think I need a little bit more of a stated goal of what we're trying to accomplish from the reporting.
Make one up, Drew. Make one up. What are we trying to get to here?
Yeah, so first off, I think there's a big distinction between if I'm measuring pipeline versus closed-won bookings, because I tend to use slightly different methodologies when I'm measuring pipeline versus closed-won bookings. Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to include any engagement points that happened after the pipeline was created, right? So I want to make sure that I align my attribution model to the type of report that I'm running, whether it's pipeline or closed won. So you can't just say like, well, if I'm this type of business, which attribution model is going to be best for me? Like there's no answer to that question. Like I literally can't answer that question. I need more information.
Okay, that's good. And thank you, Drew, for being my foil on this one. So the way to really, and I want to bring this into a slightly more complex, actually a much more complex model here in a moment. So we've talked about first touch, last touch. We've talked about even weighted. We talked about W shape. But Drew's bringing up such a great point. Up until now, what we've been doing is talking about how do we attribute pipeline. Guess what? That's only a part of the battle here, folks. We need to understand ROMI. So we need to understand what's my return on investment. So this is not the cost piece. But to get there, I need to understand what my bookings attribution is. And really, Drew, that's what you're talking about. And if I'm in a multi-product or if I'm in a multinational environment, there is no single model. And especially as we're thinking, and by the way, we even talked about pre or post attribution. And I don't want to blow people's minds, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to get to is you need to have attribution because it gives you the ability to understand the nuances in your business. And these models help you do that. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Tara, I'm going to bring this back to you. You ready? You got your machine learning hat on. Are you ready? You good? Okay. What the heck is a chain-based model?
Yeah, I mean, it's a machine learning model, and it's essentially kind to answer the question of what's kind of like your blueprint for a good or most successful customer journey. So I mean, it's going to incorporate your pre-opportunity and your post-opportunity and look at your closed won opportunities as kind of the example of things that were done well, and apply machine learning to give you a much more complex attribution model than any of the things we've been talking about so far.
So Drew, thank you, Tara. That was excellent. Drew, does this so Drew, I sort of threw this concept in front of you, which is which model applies to which, and you're like, dude, it really depends, right? I love chain-based. I'm going to ask you to comment on this. I love chain-based because it's what you talked about when it came to last touch and sort of those conversion points. But what it does is it says, I'm going to use, like, I love your opinion, Drew and Tara, and I love your opinion on what's working and what's not. We're going to let the data decide, and we're going to let a machine learning model help us understand that. And what it's going to do is come back and say, here are the critical conversion points. And hey, I'm going to build this based off some of the things you tell me. Like if you say that booking, in other words, the moment I convert revenue or the moment I convert pipeline is most critical, I'm going to come back and sort of say what your optimal scoring model looks like. So Drew, for you, like, do you see this implemented much at clients? Or are they at that sophistication level where they're able to go, okay, I get the machine learning piece, I understand how to apply it, or is there no choice for complex organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that organizations that are super mature usually are, enterprise level organizations. They have a pretty good understanding of chain-based attribution, and they're going to be the ones that are most likely to use it. Organizations that are a little bit smaller that might not have a data scientist in-house or a seasoned data analyst in-house will probably be a little bit intimidated by chain-based just because it's a little bit more complex to understand how it works. And quite frankly, one of the big things that we always have to have when we have attribution in place is it has to be defensible, right? And when you get questions about it from stakeholders, and those stakeholders could be in finance, they could be in sales, they could be other departments in marketing. If you can't understand how you came to those numbers, you can't defend it. And it feels like a black box. And so how do you trust the data when it's black box and we don't really understand how the calculations happen? So you really do have to have a certain level of maturity and sophistication to get use out of a chain-based model. I mean, I think they're great. I think they're fantastic. But in order to defend my data, I have to have a reasonable understanding of how to explain how a chain-based model works in case I get questioned.
Okay. Drew, Tara, I'm going to let whoever can come up with an example go first. But I'd love some real world examples. And by the way, Drew, thank you. Great way of sort of unpacking whether or not you're ready for chain-based, right? Are you prepared to either understand or trust the black box is really what you're saying, right? The organization mature enough that they're going, I get attribution modeling. I trust it enough that I'm going to let a machine learning model come back and tell me what's right and what's wrong. So real world examples of where you've helped clients sort of apply and understand, and I don't care which model, but I would love to get some examples for the audience so they can sort of understand what this looks like when we're trying to help clients out.
Terry, you want to go first?
Um, yeah, I mean, so I would say like the vast majority of the clients that I work with are migrating from something like a first touch onto um, usually like even weighted to start with or some W shape if they have more familiarity. And typically it's not simple B2B buyer journeys. They have long and complex cycles and they're trying to understand what the value and the return on marketing is beyond just what's bringing things in or maybe what's creating an opportunity or an MQL. Um, and so I think the process we go through a lot is a lot of what Drew was just talking about, where with chain based, you need like a level of sophistication to get that buy-in. But you also kind of need that like with any of these models beyond like a more simple first touch. Because I think what Drew brought up in the beginning, where you mentioned that a lot of times clients will come and they'll be like, I need to pick a model and I don't want to stick with it. A lot of times that comes with, it's kind of the easiest way to get buy-in to like your stakeholders, right? You're like, this is the model we're using. The numbers will always be the same because we're measuring it the same way. And that makes it kind of simpler for marketers to like present at an executive stakeholder meeting. So it's this evolution of like, we were looking at things from this one point. We're going to look at them more differently now, getting that buy-in and then helping them as an org kind of trust the data and understand, the percentages behind it and how they're measuring things. It's like, I'd say that's a process I go through with 90% of our clients.
Drew, how about you? Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the ways that I work with customers on this is a lot of times it's great for like the admin of the platform to understand the individual models and the weighting. But anybody that's not an admin doesn't need to know it at that level of granularity. So what I try to focus on is, instead of walking through the super granular, well, if this happens, then it gets 30%, but if this happens, it only gets 5%. Instead of that, I focus on what the purpose of the model is, right? So like if we're using a model that stops counting once the opportunity's been created, then I don't get into the percentage weights. I just say, when we control for engagement points that happened prior to the opportunity being created, here's the value. Because what I'm doing is I'm expressing the value of that particular attribution model, but putting it in terms that other people that a layman can understand, right? Oh, cool, this model just stops counting once the opportunity is created. Beautiful, love it, great. So if you focus more on understanding the value and purpose of a model, you have to understand less of the percent weighting and things like that. And it also helps you understand when to use the model. It also helps you understand how to explain the model to other folks, right? Because we've all been in a meeting where it got derailed because we went down a rabbit hole of, well, why does this get this percent and this get that percent? That's not we're not getting value out of attribution if our conversations are stuck there. So don't focus on that. Focus on why the model exists, what its value is, and then the insights garnered by the data. And if you focus on that stuff, the actual percentages just fade into the background, which is what we want them to do.
I'm gonna close this out here on an idea, and it's sort of been the through line of how both you, Tara, and Drew see the world and how you help clients, which is this idea of sophistication. And that is, for CaliberMind, that's very much our market, right? Our customers are typically fairly sophisticated coming in. I'm really curious how much of your experience here, and there's a yin and yang, like chicken and egg thing happening, but I sort of feel like my experience is that once you start having the power of the ability to understand what's working and what's not, and the nuance of those things within your organization, your sophistication level goes up even further. Meaning you become better and better marketers. And especially when you start layering on ROI data on top of it, like the acuity there of understanding what's working and what's not. So with that in mind, one, do you guys agree? And two, how the heck are people functioning without attribution and keeping their job? So I'll start with Tara. Do you feel like attribution sort of raises the sophistication level? And then how are people functioning without attribution? Go.
I do agree. I mean, without attribution, I think marketers are resourceful and they like to learn and iterate, so they're using whatever tools they have at their disposal to figure out what works and keep that moving forward. But I agree that having attribution definitely makes that process a little easier and more sophisticated.
Drew, I'm going to give you the final word.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things that we see happen time and time again, and this is coming off of, I just did an in-person workshop with a customer where we spent all day talking about attribution, and we had like 26 members of the marketing team in the room. What we found and what we find consistently happens is once marketers start grasping attribution, it starts bleeding into other things like campaign planning. Like, I'm going to use attribution in my campaign planning process to understand who I should be targeting and what the goals should be. Even when we talk about things like just creative strategy, aligning the messaging in a campaign to the goals, which align to our measurement strategy, right? Like, all these things start to connect, and the marketing department as a whole gets a little bit more mature and sophisticated because they're thinking about things differently. They're thinking about things in terms of, how am I going to achieve my goals, which are a little bit higher level goals than what they used to be, because we now have more capable reporting.
Okay. Tara, Drew, I really appreciate your being with us today. I have to say it's a joy when I get people on, and I'm sort of learning things as I go because I'm old. I've been around a long time, so I learned a lot today. I appreciate your time, folks. Next week it is that season again. We've got a panel of CaliberMind experts. We're going to share our perspectives and predictions for marketing in 2025. Be warned, we're going to be talking about machine learning and AI an awful lot. Again, Drew, Tara, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you guys being here.
Thanks for having me.